A couple of housekeeping details before we get started. It depends on what version of GoToWebinar you're using, exactly what your control panel will look like, but you should somewhere on the right side of your screen probably have some kind of a control panel. You can use that most importantly to ask us questions and to type those into the questions pane. It might be called the questions pane, it might be called a chat box. Again, that depends on your version of GoToMeeting. But you can type questions into that box anytime you like. If that control panel is bothering you, some versions have a control panel that's kind of large and it actually blocks a good portion of the screen. So if that's your case, what you can do is you can hide your control panel by clicking on that orange arrow. When you click on that, that will make your control panel get smaller. And then if you want to see your control panel again, for example, to type a question into the chat box, you just click on that orange box again, and that'll make your control panel visible again. I also want to let everyone know that we are recording this. We actually maxed out on our registration capability on our system. So there are a number of people who wanted to attend and were not able to. So we will have this recorded. For those of you who've been on these webinars in the past, I've been saying that this ever since we did our first webinar several months ago, and we've been having some technical problems with the capacity of our website to put these recordings online. We do have someone working on that, and we are hoping to get these online just as soon as we can. So I appreciate your patience. I know it's taken far longer than it should have, but we will get those online and available for you. And what we'll do is I'll let Leanne Wheeler, the state coordinator, know when those are available so that we can get that notification out to everyone so that you can access those. Once again, as I mentioned, because we have so many people on the call, we will not be able to take any questions over the phone. We're actually going to keep everyone on mute for the duration of the session just because of the number of people, but you're welcome to type in questions at any time in that chat box. It may be the case that we just get too many questions for us to address during the webinar, but what I'll do is I will copy those and answer them and put together some kind of a frequently asked questions document that, again, we can share with everyone. So we'll try to keep up with the questions if we can. Okay, let's get started then on the substance of our webinar today. As I'm sure many of you know, the past couple of years have been full of legislation in the state of California related to youth homelessness. There was a trend that began back in 2013. 2013 was actually the year in which there were more laws passed related to homeless children and youth than in any year in the history of the California state legislature. So 2013 was a big year. There are additional laws passed last year, and there are a few bills making their way through the process this year as well. So on this first slide, you can just see a listing of some of the bills that have passed over the past couple of years. I'm sure many of you are involved in implementing some of those in one way or another. The first one on your list, just to clarify, AB 1733, I'm not sure that's actually gone into effect yet. There are some regulations that need to be put in place for that to be implemented. So if you're thinking, well, I just went and tried to get a birth certificate for a youth, a couple of weeks ago and it wasn't free, that may in fact be the case, but that will be implemented certainly during this calendar year, and we'll be able to see those fees waived. So just a little snapshot of what we've seen over the past couple of years, but what we're really here to talk about today is AB 1806. This was passed last September. Technically, it went into effect in January of this year, although I understand that implementation of this one is not that easy, and people are sort of implementing it as well and as quickly as they can. We're going to divide AB 1806 into 3 parts and take each part one at a time. So we're going to start with a piece that has to do with providing notice to the liaison of potential expulsions for homeless students. Then we'll go on to the piece about partial credits, and then we'll end with the piece that I bet most of you want to hear about. That's the part about graduation requirements and exempting students from some of those when they transfer schools. We're going to go through that very carefully, step by step, and we're very lucky to have 2 professionals from San Juan Unified School District who are going to speak to us specifically about how they've been implementing it, some of their challenges and successes. And what I'm most excited about is that we'll be able to hear from a couple of students about their own experiences with AB 1806. So that's our agenda for the next hour or so. Before we get into the pieces, I just want to make sure that everyone's clear about the definition of a homeless child or youth. AB 1806 actually specifically incorporates the McKinney-Vento education definition of homeless. So most of the folks on the call work in schools, so you're very familiar with this. If you don't work in a school, you might be using a slightly different definition, but this definition on the slide is the one that we're working with for AB 1806 and really for the other bills related to homelessness that I referenced on the earlier slide. So we are including children and youth who are doubled up, sharing housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, as well as those who are in motels and the other living situations that you can see on your slide. I've put awaiting foster care placement in a different color on that slide, and that is because, as you know, awaiting foster care placement is part of the McKinney-Vento definition, so that is incorporated into AB 1806. But those of you who have been working with foster students know that there are particular requirements in California Education Code that relate to children and youth who are in foster care. So I don't want to create any confusion between, well, is this McKinney-Vento or is this foster youth? Most of the protections in AB 1806, in fact, all of them have been in place for youth in foster care for many years. So the recent changes to that law don't change anything about the way that you would normally serve children and youth in foster care under that law. So I'm going to kind of, in a way, pull out awaiting foster care placement from this and sort of put it aside and just say the way you've been working with foster youth over the years is absolutely the way you should continue to do so. And this bill doesn't change any of that or in any way affect their rights. One issue to clarify, because I've gotten a few questions on this, is about the age. Is there an age limit on when students can be covered by AB 1806? And the answer to that is no. Because AB 1806 incorporates the McKinney-Vento definition, and those of you who've been working with McKinney-Vento for a while know that there is no age limit in that statute. The U.S. Department of Education has said that we're really looking at state law on that. So as long as a student is eligible to attend public school in the state of California, then that student would be eligible for the protections of AB 1806. Let me just pause for one moment because I'm getting a few messages that people aren't getting audio. Artie and Melanie, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine, Patricia.
Okay, great, thanks. So it seems like there might be a couple of folks who are having some trouble on their computer, and I apologize for that, but there's not much I can do from here for that. So hopefully most folks are hearing. So anyway, as I was saying, there is no age limit on this on AB 1806. So as we go through the provisions of the law, you'll see where this might come up, particularly when we're talking about high school graduation. There might be a student who might be 18 or 19. And as I said, as long as they're eligible for public education in California, then they would be eligible for AB 1806 as long as they meet the other criteria that we'll address in a moment. Okay, I think we've got the preliminary information out of the way, so we're all starting from the same basic assumptions. So let's get into that first piece, which was about the notice of potential expulsions. What these pieces are designed to do here is to just make sure that if there are issues that a student is going through, challenges, things that might be affecting that student's behavior, oftentimes the liaison may know things about that student, may have information and context and background that really would be valuable for the people who are considering that expulsion to know and to hear. So the philosophy behind these changes is let's make sure that folks who are considering expulsions really have all the information they need to make good decisions about that, including information that may be coming from the liaison. There's nothing in these provisions that I'm about to go through that require that a liaison participate in expulsions, that require that a liaison attend expulsion meetings or hearings. These are really just notice requirements. And if you are the liaison and you receive notice about this and you think, well, actually, I have some information about what the student has been going through over the past couple of weeks that would be important to share with the committee, you have that information, you can go ahead and get in touch with them and share that information with them. So in terms of the specifics, there are three parts to this. Part one has to do with students with special needs. So if a potential expulsion involves this homeless student with special needs, the LEA, that would be the school district or the county office of education or even the charter school, is proposing a change in placement. That's sort of special education speak for an expulsion in this context. And that change in placement or expulsion is at the discretion of the principal or superintendent. Then the liaison must be invited to participate in the meeting that's going to decide on that expulsion, and those are generally known as manifestation determinations. So again, it's an invitation to participate. It's not mandatory participation, but there's a notice provided to the liaison so that person has the opportunity to share information. And that notice or that invitation can be in the most cost-effective way possible. A quick email, a phone call, maybe even run into them in the hallway. You might even be the same person, so you can just alert yourself that this is going to happen. Absolutely in the most cost-effective and convenient way possible for the school. Part 2 on this notice provision, now we're moving not only from students with special needs, but any student. So for any homeless student, if the LEA is proposing an expulsion and that expulsion is discretionary, the liaison must be notified of the hearing with at least 10 days advance notice, and that's 10 calendar days. For those of you who maybe aren't so familiar with how expulsions work, I assume that most of you are, but actually there are code provisions in the education code that define when an expulsion is discretionary and when it is mandatory. So that's where these words discretionary come from. So if you've got a discretionary expulsion that may be taking place, there is a requirement to notify the liaison of that hearing so that they can provide information or participate if they wish. The last piece of this notice of expulsions, again, we're talking about any homeless student, not just those with special needs. We have a proposed expulsion, and this is a required expulsion under the education code. In that case, the liaison may be notified. So why is it, must they be notified if it's a discretionary expulsion, but if it's a required expulsion that's only may be notified? That's because if the expulsion is required, then really the effect of the information that the liaison might have is going to be very limited because it's a statutorily required expulsion regardless of what information the liaison may have to contribute. However, you still may want to be involved in that because you might want to follow up with that student and find out, okay, so this has happened or this is going to happen. What's your plan? What's your plan B? What might be some supports that we can put in place in the meantime, or just help them to plan for what's going to happen after that expulsion hearing. So those are the provisions about the notice of expulsion. They're pretty clear, they're pretty objective, and you can see them, of course, on these slides, and also they're pretty clear in the statute itself. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier, in your control panel, whether you have the newer version or the older version of GoToMeeting, you should have a materials tab. The PowerPoint for this session is under the materials tab, as well as many materials that different LEAs have been kind enough to send in. We have some fantastic materials from Orange County. We have materials from LA County as well as San Juan Unified. They're really, really well done, and I would encourage you to download those and go through them and think about how you might be able to adapt them for your own LEA, because I think they've done a really good job with breaking down the provisions of the law into step-by-step processes that really will help with implementation. Okay, moving on to our next topic, which is the partial credit provisions in AB 1806. I'm sure that many, if not all of you on the call, know that there have been partial credit provisions in California Education Code, at least for the past decade. I put on the slide there one of the original, if not the actual original statute that was passed in 2004 about partial credits. However, we have found that there has been some confusion on how these provisions apply. So let me take a pause here. We'll get a little audience involvement in this session here. I'd like to ask you, in your experience, have you or colleagues in your agency, and by agency I mean your school district, your county, etc., been confused ever about how these partial credit requirements apply to homeless students? Go ahead and answer yes or no. I didn't give you a third answer, just yes or no. And I can see you all answering. I'm going to give you a few more seconds here to get your answer in. Looks like most folks have voted, so we'll give you 3 last seconds. 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to close the poll and share your results. It looks like just about, between 2/3 and 3/4 of you said yes, that you have experienced some confusion on this. Many of you said no. When we originally were working on AB 1806, the feedback we were getting was that yes, there was some confusion, and so the attention behind this was to try to help out with that. So thank you very much for participating in my poll. I'm glad to see that we did not do this in vain. There was some confusion about that. So let's take a look at what AB 1806 hopefully is helping with. So AB 1806, as I said, was meant to eliminate ongoing confusion about those partial credits. There were basically two statutes that were inconsistent. So what we did was we took that second one, and if you're one of those statutory folks, you're going to recognize this, 51225.2, and amended it to add homeless students to it. So now really everywhere in the education code where it talks about partial credits, it's clear that it applies to students who are homeless. So specifically, what we've got in AB 1806, we have a requirement that school districts and county offices of education shall accept coursework satisfactorily completed by homeless students while attending another school. And that's the case even if the pupil did not complete the entire course. So that's essentially what partial credit means, that they did not complete the entire course. It's also required that they issue full or partial credit for the coursework that was completed, and that they enroll the student in the same or an equivalent course, so that will allow the student to continue and complete the entire course and therefore get the full credit for that. There's also requirements about what school districts and county offices of education cannot do. They cannot require homeless students to retake a course if the student has already satisfactorily completed it. So no double duty there. If they've taken the course, they need to be given the credit for that and not required to repeat it. And also cannot require homeless students to retake the part of a course if the student has completed part of it. There's a slight exception to this. So if the school district or county, in consultation with the holder of educational rights for the student, finds that the student actually could complete the requirements in time to graduate from high school, so that repeating that portion of the course would not delay the student's graduation, then they actually can ask that student to retake the entire course. Now, I want to pause for a minute because I just said a phrase, the educational rights holder. And I've also gotten quite a few questions on this, so I wanted to address this right now before we move forward. Who is the educational rights holder if we're talking about an unaccompanied homeless student? So everything in AB 1806, as you've seen so far, it applies to students who are homeless whether they're with their parents or whether they're unaccompanied. But the issue of unaccompanied comes into play when we're talking about that educational rights holder. Who is it? Is it the parent? With foster youth, there's some pretty specific definition of what that means, whether it means a caseworker or a foster parent or a biological parent. But with unaccompanied homeless students, as you know, if you've been working with this population, there's no clear definition of this in the McKinney-Vento Act or in state law. And that's because it actually can vary depending on the situation of that unaccompanied homeless student. So the shortest and probably easiest answer to this question is look at in other contexts outside of AB 1806, in contexts like enrollment or participation in a field trip or signing a student out to go to the doctor. Who is making those decisions for the student? There should be someone doing that under the McKinney-Vento Act to make sure that that student has full participation and full enrollment in the district. So you might look at who actually did the enrollment for the student, who's making those other decisions for the student. Very often, it's going to be the youth himself or herself. I think particularly for youth who really don't have a caregiver in place, that's going to be the most common solution that school districts are using. So that might be the case for a youth that you're working with. And if that's the case, then that's going to be the educational rights holder for AB 1806 as well. There very well may be a caregiver. Oftentimes, you might have caregivers who are using that caregiver's affidavit to enroll students in school. And if that's the case, then that caregiver could be considered the educational rights holder. There may be situations where a parent has actually gone ahead and given someone an educational power of attorney. In my experience, that's fairly rare, but certainly if a parent has done that, then that's the person who holds the rights to make those decisions for the student. There might be circumstances, depending on exactly what's going on, where the parent retains that role in your school district. So I don't have a black and white answer for you, but I can tell you that AB 1806 wouldn't be any different from any other context in your school district in terms of who's going to make those decisions. Okay, I'm going to pause for a moment because I've thrown a lot of information at you and we're about to get into the good stuff with the high school graduation requirements. So before we move on, if you have any questions on what we've covered so far, please go ahead and put them into the chat box. I won't be taking any questions yet on the graduation requirement topic because I'd like to go through the slides first to make sure that I'm being clear and methodical about this. But I'll be happy to look at any questions about the other topics. And I actually do see one already in the chat box from Brent Johnson. Thank you, Brent. The question is the requirement for notification to the liaison when proposing a change of placement, does that only apply to expulsions, or does the requirement also apply to all IEPs considering change of placement? That's a great question because since the statute does use that expression change of placement, what does that mean? Um, in this particular context, this would be limited to an expulsion change of placement. I will review that and just make sure 100% that I feel really confident about my answer. But I think that is the case, and so that would be what you'd be looking at is this a change of placement that's going to result in the student being out of school because of the expulsion? There may be changes of placement, for lots of reasons. The current placement might not be working to meet that student's needs. They might be changing the site of where services are provided or changing the kinds of services provided, and the liaison would not need to be involved in all of those different decisions or even necessarily invited to participate in them. So thanks, Brent. That's a good one. I hope that helps. I think that's all the questions that we have in so far, giving you just an extra second to put anything in. Oh, wait, I think we do have some other questions coming in. So let me take a look and see if I can answer this. Who would have the educational rights on a foster student? That's a question that is probably too specific and a little bit off topic for this particular webinar. Educational rights for foster students can be very, very complex, and usually what you would need to do is speak with the caseworker and find out who has those rights for that particular student. It could be a variety of different people, and it's really going to depend on what's going on in the case and what's going on with that child's parents. So I'm going to defer you to the caseworker on that one. Another question, is there an age limit that a child can sign for themselves as their own education rights holder? And it's referencing special education. So for the purposes of special education, there are some very specific rules about who can sign IEPs, who can sign to consent for evaluations, etc. And a school district will have to follow those rules whether the student is homeless or not. So those rules are established by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal law, as well as state laws and regulations within the state of California. So when you're talking about a student with special needs, I certainly would speak with your special ed department and find out what they're advising in terms of who can sign for special education purposes. Now, for any purpose that's not special education, as well as for students who don't have special needs, there is no age limit under the McKinney-Vento Act for when a child can sign for himself or herself. You may have a district policy on that, and you certainly may want to take it on a case-by-case basis, obviously depending on the ability and capacity of the youth to make particular decisions. But there's no limit. There's no specific statutory or regulatory limit on that. I see quite a few other questions about special education and decision making. I'm going to put those on hold, and I can try to get back to those in an FAQ document later. But those are very complex and really too much to go into right now on this call. Educational decision making for students with special needs, as I said, is very, very specific, and it's defined by federal and state law. So that's really a separate issue from what we're talking about with AB 1806. We do have a question. Can a parent sign and notarize a document providing educational rights to another person? Absolutely yes. The answer is yes. Even in my family, we do that frequently. When I take my niece, and I sometimes have her with me for months at a time, and her mom will sign a similar document like that to me. That's absolutely possible. And actually, if you can have parents do that, it can be very helpful because it can just clarify for you who's really the person empowered to do this for the child. We find that happens pretty infrequently, unfortunately, but it is legally valid, and it is something that you can try to pursue. And if you have that, you do need to follow what that document says, because it is the parent's right to confer those educational rights to another person. Let me take just maybe one or two more questions, because I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for the second half of this. I will, as I said, get to these questions in writing later. There's one just clarification question that I think is important to address. When I say liaison, what am I talking about? And the question here says, is the liaison the school district or county liaison? And really, it depends on who is educating that student. So it would be whoever that student's liaison is. If that student is in a high school in a regular school district, then the school district liaison would be the person who would be sort of in charge for AB 1806 purposes as the liaison. There are students who are in schools that are actually part of the county, and the county is really the LEA that's running that school and that is in charge of that. And so in that case, it would be the county liaison who would be sort of responsible under AB 1806 for these pieces. I see a few questions that we're going to address in the next section of the presentation. So I think I will go on to that part of the presentation for you so that we can clarify that. I will say that for the partial credits piece, some of the materials in the materials section will help to address sort of what are considered partial credits, how do you deal with those. There are some publications also that the California Department of Education has put out to help people calculate how do you calculate one credit or a part of a credit. And so I would suggest that you contact Leanne Wheeler or myself, and we can point you towards those publications. And we'll have our contact information at the end of the presentation so you can see how to reach us. So with that, I'm going to go on to the next section and the final section, which is graduation requirements and mobility. So the purpose behind this piece is it's designed to limit the impact of mobility during high school on graduation. And when we were working on AB 1806 last year, quite a few school districts took the time and did the work to send me data about their mobility rate of students who are homeless during high school. I really appreciate you doing that. I didn't want to call you out on the slide because it just didn't seem fair, so I didn't name the districts, but we got some great data, and I'm sure most of you on the call are experiencing similar things in your own districts about how much students who are homeless move around during high school and as well as during younger years. And research shows that this mobility during high school has a very significant impact on the ability of students to graduate from high school. So with that, let's get another piece of audience participation here. We've got another poll. This one has multiple answers. So the question is, have you or someone in your local education agency, your school, your county, your school district worked with a homeless student who transferred schools toward the end of high school in 11th or 10th, 12th grade and was hurt by differing graduation requirements? And here you can put multiple answers. You can say, yes, they dropped out. Yes, they didn't graduate on time. And yes, they suffered other negative consequences if that's the case. So you're allowed to answer as many answers as apply to you. So I'll give you a few minutes here to read through those and indicate your responses. Okay, just a few more seconds here for you to respond. We're going to count. I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what you all answered here. So about a quarter of you saying that you either worked with or someone in your school or district worked with a student who dropped out of high school because of a school transfer and different graduation requirements. I think that's really significant. And that's exactly what AB 1806 is intended to prevent, as well as not graduating on time and other negative consequences. If you'd like to share what those negative consequences were, if you want to type those into the chat box, you're welcome to do that, or not. I would be interested to hear what some of those might have been in your experience directly with students. And then, of course, some of you have never heard of this being a problem, and that's great. And if that's the case, then it may be that AB 1806 isn't something that you even will end up working with all that much. But for the rest of you, let's go ahead and talk about what AB 1806 really says. Okay, don't get overwhelmed yet. We're going to take this step by step. Overall, what AB 1806 says is that a school district shall exempt a pupil who is a homeless child or youth who transfers between schools any time after completion of the pupil's second year of high school from all coursework and other requirements adopted by the governing board of the school that are in addition to statewide coursework requirements. And that is the case unless the district makes a finding that the pupil is reasonably able to complete those additional school district graduation requirements in time to graduate from high school by the end of the 4th year of high school. So what we're going to do is we're going to take each of those red pieces one by one and make sure that we're clear about what all those pieces mean. Okay, first of all, a pupil is a homeless child or youth. Well, we already talked about the definition. Again, we're using that McKinney-Vento definition of homeless, and there is no age limit attached to that. Now, when you're a nerdy lawyer like me, what you notice are things like the tense of verbs and where commas are located. So if you look at the language of this bill, of this statute now, the word is in present tense, and the word transfers are in present tense. So they're both happening at the same time. What that means is the student must meet the definition of homeless at the time the student transfers between schools. So let's break that down a little bit and put it into some specific examples. Example 1, if a student is now housed, but they were homeless, and they did transfer schools while they were homeless after completing their second year of high school, then the student is eligible for the exemption. So they might be housed now, but previously and at the same time, they were both homeless and transferred schools after they completed that second year of high school, so they're eligible for the exemption. If the student was homeless and was eligible for the exemption because of transferring schools at the appropriate time, but the student declined the exemption and said, no, I don't want it, I'm going to stay in school and go ahead and do this the regular way. And then later, while still homeless, the student changes his or her mind and kind of realizes, well, I'm not going to be able to get this done. I actually do want that AB 1806 exemption. The student will still qualify for it. Because again, we've still got all this stuff still happening. We're still in present tense here. So we're homeless, eligible for the exemption, still homeless. The student will still qualify for it. And that's the same for youth in foster care as well, just FYI. Now, if the student was homeless and eligible for the exemption and declined it, and then later becomes housed and wants the exemption, the student doesn't qualify any longer because we've changed tenses of our verbs here. We're not all the right criteria at the same time. The student no longer is a homeless student. So that's a difference that I've gotten questions about this, and so I wanted to make sure that I try to clarify that for you. Now, once you have a student who's eligible, because we've got everything happening at the right time here, the student is homeless, transfers schools, gets the exemption, and then later the student finds permanent housing. Well, the student still gets the exemption. It's not the case where you're homeless, you transfer schools, then you move into permanent housing and you lose your exemption. So you're essentially putting a student in a position of having to choose between graduating from high school or having safe housing. And that's not, of course, what the law is intended to do. I think this is pretty clear in the way the statute's written right now, but there's actually a bill going through this year called AB 1166 that will just clarify that and just make sure that's the case. And again, that's the case for youth in foster care as well. So we're trying to be really consistent with these requirements so that hopefully that will facilitate implementation and not make it so that, whoa, we're doing different things for homeless students and foster students, and that can start to get confusing. So let's take a pop quiz. This piece can be a little confusing, so let's see how we're doing and how I'm doing, I guess, in terms of explaining this, if I'm making any sense or not. So here's a little scenario for you that actually was sent in to me by someone. Oops, sorry about that. Student loses housing due to an eviction and is identified as homeless. That student is in her third year of high school and transfers to a new school while she's homeless. She has a limited amount of credits and would not be able to graduate in 4 years. Shortly after, the student regains permanent housing. Does the student still qualify for AB 1806 now that she is housed? Let's give you the chance to answer. So, is a student whose homelessness is brief eligible for AB 1806 if the student transfers schools while homeless? So you think this particular student, is she eligible for AB 1806 or is she not? Give you just about another second or two to answer that. And I will be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We've got 88% saying yes, 12% saying no. So that means that I did a pretty good job, but I probably could have done better because the answer is yes. The student does still qualify for AB 1806, and that again is because the student was homeless and transferred at the time that the student was homeless. So we had both of those things happening simultaneously. If the student finds housing later, that does not change the student's eligibility for AB 1806 protections. And again, once that student is granted the exemption because the student's eligible, if the student moves into permanent housing, that doesn't then eliminate her ability to get that exception. As I said, the same is true for foster students. So if they meet the definition of pupil in foster care, they change schools, they will be eligible for that exemption, even if very shortly thereafter that child is returned home and the court closes the case. It's meant to facilitate implementation, so you're not going back and forth, yes, AB 1806, no, AB 1806, and it would really, I think, be very confusing for schools and students to have it go that way. So, of course, this means that we want to make sure that we are carefully identifying students who are homeless, as is always the case, and as I know liaisons struggle and do a great job to do that and to make those good determinations. The notice requirements in AB 1806 also play into this question of eligibility. In AB 1806, the school district is required to let a student know about this eligibility as well as the educational decision maker for the student. So within 30 calendar days of that transfer, the school district needs to let the homeless student know that they may qualify for this exemption and have a conversation about, whether the student qualifies and how to go about deciding if the student's going to use AB 1806 or not. If the school district doesn't do that notice, whether it's because they're just a little late and they kind of don't get to it within the 30 days, or whether because maybe they didn't know that that student was homeless, the student hadn't been identified yet by the liaison, or the information hadn't been shared for whatever reason, if that notice does not take place in a timely manner, that does not affect the student's eligibility. Someone asked me, well, what if the student doesn't know about AB 1806 and then they move into permanent housing? Well, then we don't have to give them the exception, right? Because they're in permanent housing now. that's not the case, because they still need to be informed that they were eligible. Oopsie, sorry, we didn't get to you in time to let you know that you were eligible, but you were. And so we need to give you the option to take advantage of that situation if it's appropriate. And again, AB 1166 will clarify that, just to make sure that is really clear for everyone. Okay, I'm going to keep going on through a few more slides. We will get to some questions later. I want to make sure we have time to hear from San Juan as well. So transferring between schools after the completion of the pupil's second year of high school, how do you calculate whether that student has completed the second year of high school? The statute's pretty clear about that. We're going to use either the number of credits the pupil has earned up till the date of the transfer, or the length of the pupil's school enrollment. Either one of those methods, whichever will qualify the pupil for the exemption. So we're going to try to get them qualified if we can through either of those two methods. There was a question about whether AB 1806 applies to a homeless youth who transfers during the summer after 10th grade. So does it have to be only 11th and 12th grade? What about after the summer of 10th grade? And what we're looking at here again is, have they completed those credits, or has their enrollment in school been long enough so that this now counts as being after they have completed the second year? So summer after 10th grade, the answer usually is going to be yes. They have completed their second year, so they usually are going to qualify. But again, you're going to look at those credits, and you're going to look at that method of calculating those credits. Thank you for letting me know that I still had the survey up. I got a little involved in my presentation and forgot to take that down. Thank you. Okay, last piece I want to talk about before we get to our presenters from a school district. The last piece of AB 1806 talks about we need to provide this exemption to the students unless the school district makes a finding that the pupil is reasonably able to complete the graduation requirements in time to graduate within 4 years. So what does that mean, to be reasonably able to complete those requirements? Well, it's going to be a case-by-case decision, really depend on how much that student has advanced in his or her studies, how many credits are left, how much time is left. Obviously consulting with the youth and that educational decision maker if available. And it's something that you can reevaluate as well. So you're really looking at this question at the time that the student transfers. But a few months later, you might revisit and you might say, we thought that this was going to be doable, but we were wrong. This really isn't doable. And so we're going to look back at that and reevaluate that decision. Fifth year, there is a provision in AB 1806 that talks about a fifth year in high school. So if the student can't finish in 4 years, but it looks like they actually could finish in 5, then essentially we're going to let the student or the educational decision maker make that decision. Are we going to go the route of AB 1806, or are we going to go ahead and stay in high school for a fifth year and get a regular high school diploma from the school district at the end of that fifth year? So it requires informing the student about the option, letting them know how that fifth year might affect their ability to get into college. So the AB 1806 diploma, of course, is a little bit different from a regular school district diploma. And so you could have a conversation about how that might affect post-secondary admission. You can provide some information about transferring into community college. And then, as I said, it's basically going to be that student or decision maker deciding whether to do the fifth year option or whether to stay or whether to do the AB 1806 option. Once a student is exempted, so they're going to go ahead and do AB 1806, we've had the conversation, we've provided the notice, we've made the decision, they're going to do AB 1806. If that student, for whatever reason, actually is able to complete the statewide coursework requirements before the end of the 4th year, that student cannot be required to graduate early, as long as they're otherwise entitled to remain in school so that they can stick around and till the end of that school year. The school district, as I mentioned, shall notify the student about how the AB 1806 diploma might affect the student's ability to get admission to a post-secondary. And the school district should not revoke the exemption. So once the exemption is granted and that student is doing AB 1806, it's not something that later can be revocable. And last, other sort of catch-all protections here, I think these are kind of obvious. A school district should not require or request that a student transfer schools just to qualify for AB 1806. And the flip side of that, a student shall not transfer schools just to qualify for AB 1806. So this is something that we're putting in place to help students who have to transfer and do transfer while they're homeless, not to flip it around and do the transfer only to get the protection. Um, and eligible students cannot be forced to take the exemption. So if they choose to go to do a fifth year, or if they just choose not to take the exemption, that cannot be forced. So with that, I am going to stop talking and let our wonderful liaisons from San Juan Unified School District, and I'm going to ask you guys if you don't mind introducing yourselves, and I'll manage your slides for you as you're speaking.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Artie Ferris from San Juan, and
good morning, Melanie Barbeau. We also have two students here, Rajan and Justice, with us.
Our experience was that we dove right into AB 1806. Our program manager worked on forms, and actually LA Unified's form summarizing the law was very helpful to us, and we were able to borrow that to get us going. Additionally, we worked with foster youth. But the benefit, we just wanted to talk a little bit about the benefit of this law. The students are feeling very encouraged that they can finish high school and get their diploma rather than having to drop out or just go get a GED. And the students really are excited to be getting their high school diploma. They feel better about themselves. A lot of our students have plans to join the military, and now they don't have to worry about lack of a diploma to do that. They don't feel isolated as much. They feel like they're accomplishing something, and they aren't having that pain of losing their high school graduation, losing the same experience as their peers, and they're feeling very much happy and relieved that they're able to obtain this goal. So it really helps them feel a part of the school campus and the community. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about our process of implementation. We started out by sending out information to all the administrators and staff in the district through our leadership bulletin with the forms attached. And then we went school by school and gave student lists to each school. And within that, we also worked with the foster youth counselor who's connected with all the high school counselors. So they work together and work through which students at what schools in conjunction with us. So the counselors and the admin have been really interactive and supportive with us because we've pretty much been doing each case by case. And to date, we've processed about 45 students for a number of different reasons and circumstances, but all of them would not be graduating this year if we had not processed them. We had a couple of students, one due to drug addiction, who we had the paperwork completed, but she did not go to rehab and did not come back, and we're still hoping that she will. We have the paperwork waiting for her. And we had another student who injured himself and needed surgery, and instead of staying and finishing out school, which he could have, and taking advantage of this, a relative removed him to the Bay Area, which was very unfortunate. However, we have the paperwork, and should they come back, we would be able to go forward with it. One of the things that we really made sure to do was obtain updated affidavits, because we wanted to make sure that we were crystal clear that they were homeless at the time they changed schools, and or are also still homeless at the present time. And as far as data, what we have been doing is we have in our student information system a program history where we put the information about our students that uploads to CalPads in the different categories it requires. And should the system change, then we will be able to pull those students straight up into CalPads for identification. And then the other thing, process-wise, is our manager is looking into mandated cost reimbursement to see if that's possible. And just a little note on the side, I wanted to say we work with a very large chartered school that's dependent on us, and we set up a system with their counselors and their outreach worker who does most of the work with our kids living in transition, so that they review the cases, and then we get together once they have the information gathered, and we sign off on all those together. So that was kind of interesting because we weren't sure as far as the credits and all how the relationship between the district and that school and what was appropriate, but we figured that out, we think, in a good way. So that's in a nutshell what we've been doing, and we will be reevaluating at the end of the year and polishing, because in talking to everyone and talking at our liaison meeting last week, we just have discovered some good forms and whatnot. Like, we thought, wow, we really need to have signs up in the counseling office too, different things that we can do to make kids aware of this legislation. So I am going to stop talking and turn the microphone over to Melanie so that she can introduce the young people that are here with us today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with 3 of our students. We actually had a third one come in. Just before the meeting started, I found out that Rajon is going to graduate with all his credits. So he's in here to talk about how he was eligible under AB 1806, and that currently he is going to graduate in June with his diploma. Justice, who's here, and you can see her picture up on the screen now, is a high school senior, and she has a goal of becoming a pediatrician. She lives with her aunt and takes light rail and the bus to school and travels about 12 miles distance to get here to and from. She's very excited to graduate, and AB 1806 has made a huge difference in her life and her family's life for her. She will be able to walk with her class and won't be left behind. And Justice is here to talk. If you'd like to hear from her, let me move it over.
Say good morning.
Good morning. I'm just very excited to graduate because I didn't think it was possible. I want other kids to know, like, there's still hope out there. You just really have to take time to find those sources to get help and just go for it. You just can't give up. And having support is a big part too, because without support, you feel like you have nothing and you're not encouraged a lot. So having support is a big thing too. So, yeah. Thank you.
Does anybody have questions? And I also have Matthew here, who is going to graduate in June under the AB 1806. If you'd like to say something, Matthew, about graduating and how you.
Honestly, like she said, I didn't think it was possible at all. I didn't. And then when I found out I was able to like graduate through the AB 1806, then I was excited. I told almost everybody, and it's like the help that I got just boosted my confidence and helped me want to achieve more. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't feel like it was capable because it was too hard, because I was doing a lot by myself. So once I got help, it just kept me going, kept me moving.
And what's your goal?
My goal is to play college ball, and if that doesn't work, I want to be a chef.
A chef?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. And Rajon is here and going to say something too. Go ahead, Rajon.
Rajon. I'm currently graduating off my hard work. Freshman year, I was lost. Sophomore year, I met a coach that resembled my father that passed 8th grade summer. He helped me through a lot. Then recently, last year, he moved to San Juan. But I stayed determined, and I knew what my goal was, so I kept growing until I reached that goal, and I'm here. Now I'm going to graduate.
And this would have allowed you a plan B just in case, right?
Yep.
All right, thank you guys. Let's give them a
Thank
hand.
you. Appreciate it. I hear a clap. Okay. We met yesterday with Justice's father, and he talked about the 14 additional children in the family and how proud they are. She's the baby and the last of 15 children in her family to graduate. She was really concerned, and we had sat down immediately when we found out about AB 1806, and she was not going to graduate had it not been for this law passing. She didn't think it was possible, and this was the green light for her. She hopes that she can help other kids see her graduate and that they're encouraged by this. She wants them to know that there is hope left, and if you care about graduating, get help. You can do it. It is possible. Justice wants to touch somebody, other students in her life, with her story, because getting to graduation has been so hard for her. So thank you very much. And back to you, Patricia.
Thank you both so much, and thank you, Matthew and Justice and Rejan. You guys got me a little choked up over here, I'll be honest, but I really appreciate you sharing your story and taking the time to talk to us about that. I'll bet that other folks on the call may have stories that they want to share, and if you do, feel free to pop them in the chat box. I'd love to read them, and I'd love to hear about those. So let's take some questions. I was kind of skimming through the chat box a little bit myself, so I have some questions ready to answer, and you can go ahead and put some more in there. We are getting short on time, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm sure I won't get to all of your questions, but I will copy those and put together a document that will be able to respond to those. In terms of some of the questions that have come in, a question of sort of what's the difference between this 4-year diploma, the 5-year diploma? What is that all about? So it's really not so much about the time of the diploma, it's more about who is giving that diploma and what requirements the student is meeting. So a student can get a regular diploma from the school district in 4 years or in 5 years. Or a student can get an AB 1806 diploma, and the difference really is that the AB 1806 diploma is meeting the statewide graduation requirements, whereas a school district may have additional requirements above and beyond what the state requires. So what we're talking about there really is just what requirements the student is meeting. The reason why it may become an issue has to do with getting into a post-secondary institution. There are some post-secondary institutions that look differently at that AB 1806 statewide diploma as opposed to a school district diploma. And what I'd like to do is point you again towards some of those materials that are in the materials tab. There are 4 documents from San Juan Unified School District that I think are excellent, that really walk you step by step through this decision of how do you have this conversation with a student, is a student eligible or not. But what I want to reference right now, there are some documents there from Orange County that really go into the different requirements for the different diplomas and also how that might affect post-secondary access. So take a look at those materials from Orange County. Thank you to Jeannie Oury from Orange County for sending those. Those are really good documents. They're up in the materials tab above. And if you can't get those right now, you should also receive an email later on today that should have a link to those. And I'm going to ask Leanne Wheeler if we can maybe just get those out to everybody anyway, because they're so great. We had a question about what exactly does it mean to transfer schools? What does school mean? What if a student's coming out of juvenile hall? What if the student is coming out of hospitalization? There's really nothing in this bill that defines what it means to transfer school. So the real question is, was that student in something that qualifies as a school? So if the student's hospitalized, they might still be getting some home-based services while they're in school. They might actually still be, while they're in the hospital, they might still be considered to be in school if their school is sending them work or sending a teacher out to assist with them. It might even be through an IEP that they're getting those services. So then if they come out of the hospital and they now go to a different school than the school that was serving them while they were hospitalized, that would count as a transfer of schools. Juvenile hall schools, I think usually in California, are run by the county. Again, this could be different. You want to look at your own specific situation. But if that student is moving from one school, with quotation marks around it, to another, that's going to count as a transfer. It really doesn't matter that much what kind of school it is. You're just looking to see, is it a school or is it not a school? And is that a transfer from one school or another? We had a question about transportation. I would just like to generally say that AB 1806 does not have any transportation provisions, and it does not affect the obligations to transport students under the McKinney-Vento Act or under any other requirements that you might have to transport a student. So it doesn't add any transportation requirements, and it doesn't take away any transportation requirements. Mostly, at least under the McKinney-Vento Act, if you're providing transportation to the school of origin, then you're essentially preventing that student from having to transfer schools. So in a way, you're preventing them from even having to need AB 1806, which is great. But this bill itself does not affect any transportation that you would normally provide to a student based on whatever they might be eligible for. And I think the last question I'll address just quickly was there was a question about students coming in from other countries. That really wouldn't be something that you'd even consider in AB 1806. You're really just going to look at, is the student homeless? Are they transferring schools after completing their second year of high school? And whether they, were born in the United States or came in from another country, or whether they're documented or undocumented, that's not something that's really considered at all under this statute. So you're really just looking at homeless transferred after this completing their second year of high school. So just looking at the time, I don't want to take up too much more of your time here. So I will take a look at those questions and put something together that Leanne can send out. I'm going to go ahead and give you some extra time to download those materials. So when this is over, I'm not going to cut the webinar right away. I'll leave it open so that you can try to manipulate and download those materials. When I do close the webinar, however, you will get a little evaluation. I think it has 2 questions in it, so it might even take you less than 2 minutes to fill it out. So if you wouldn't mind, we'd appreciate you completing that, and so that we can make sure that we're still doing an okay job with these webinars. And the last thing I want to show you, of course, is contact information. You're welcome to contact me anytime with questions. I absolutely encourage you to contact Leanne Wheeler. She's sort of the boss of how things are supposed to be done in California under McKinney-Vento and really anything related to homeless students. So while I can give you a national perspective and a federal perspective, she's sort of where the buck stops when we're talking about how things should be done in your state. So I would definitely encourage you to get in touch with her. And we'll work together to make sure that you get all the follow-up materials from this webinar, as including the question panes. So with that, I think I am done here. I want to thank again Justice, Rajan, and Matthew so much for participating. I want to thank Melanie and Artie for joining us and for providing their experiences with this law. And again, Jeannie Ari and Melissa Schoonmacher from Orange County and LA County for sharing documents as well. We've got some great materials put together here, so you all don't have to reinvent the wheel on that. So thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and leave this open to give you some time to download the materials if you haven't had a chance to do that yet.